Alright, so let's start by creating a fresh project in Node.js. So I have created an empty folder. In this folder, I'll open a terminal. For that, I can type cmd here. It's a shortcut to open terminal in this directory. Okay, let me zoom a little bit. So here, I can type npm init to initialize our project. Let's hit enter. So make sure you have Node.js installed in your system first. Okay, and then we can maybe give it this package name, let's say chatApp. I'll hit enter, and rest of the things we can keep that default. Alright. So this has generated a package.json file. Okay, and now I can open my VS Code in this directory. For that, I can type code dot to open VS Code in my current directory. Alright, beautiful. Okay, we have our package.json. So you know what, VS Code actually comes with this own terminal, integrated terminal, but I don't use it when I'm recording my tutorials because it takes a little bit, screen area, right? So I don't want that. Instead, we will be using separate terminal to install packages and to start the development server. Okay, so let's install two packages. So I'll install, first of all, we need GraphQL itself, and we need Apollo server to serve GraphQL from the Node.js side on HTTP. I'll hit enter, and we will wait for a few seconds. And it's done. Okay, so what we will do is, let's create a new file. Let's say server.js. Okay, see, we have these two packages now added into our dependencies. Okay, let's read the documentation how to initialize the server. Okay, so we need to, first of all, we have already installed these two libraries, packages I mean. Then we need to import a couple of things from Apollo server, and then we can initialize it, right? This way. Okay, so first of all, I want to use ES6 import syntax. For that, in package.js, and I can add type, and type will be module to use ES6 imports. Okay, so I can import something from Apollo server, and something is called as Apollo server, and then something called as GQL. Okay, and let's do the initialization part first. Let me copy this from the docs and let me paste it in here. Okay, yeah, so server initialization has done. We have to create a schema and resolver. Now what is this schema and resolver? I'll explain you, don't worry about that. Okay, so first we will create our schema. What is a schema? So think of it as, we have class in other programming languages. Let's say we have a user class. Okay, what we have in that user class? We will have properties. For example, user will have a name, so we will have a name property. We can have a password property. We can have an email property, right? The schema is similar to that. Okay, similar to class. So let's create it. So I'll give this schema a name. Let's say type defs. Okay, and then I'll use this GQL function that we have imported, and then I'll use this backticks. So these are not normal code, these are backticks. Now this feature, we call it as tagged template literal. We have this feature in JavaScript called as tagged template literals. So this is the syntax for it. We use function and then we pass template literals. These are not normal code, these are backticks. Now the advantage of backticks is that I can write a string on a multiple line. Yes. So those who do not know about tag template, you can pause this video and read more on Google about that. Okay, this is just a syntax to write the schema. Okay, you can assume it that way also. Okay, so what we will have in this schema? Okay, so we will have type called as query, query. We will have something called as query type. Okay, now what will have in this? Okay, what we will have in this? So let's say from the client side we will query. Okay, we will query something called as, we are creating our own property, that is greet. Okay, from the client we will query something called as greet, and what server will respond to this greet query? So let's say server will respond a string value maybe. So here we can type a return type. Okay, so if client will query something called as greet, then server will respond with a string value. Okay, so this is the schema we have created. Now, just by creating a schema, this is not going to work. We need to resolve this query as well. So for that, we will create a resolver. So here I'll create a resolver, and resolver is nothing, it's just an object, and inside that object, what we want to resolve. So we want to resolve a query. So here we will add a query. Again, this will be an object. Okay, now in here, we will type what query we want to resolve. We want to resolve the greet query, like so. What response we want to give for this greet query? So basically, we need to write a function, and whatever that function returns, that will be sent as a response to that query. Let's say we can maybe respond hello world, like so. Okay, so we have written function in a single line. So if you want, you can write it in a multiple line also. Okay, this way. But since we are returning a single line statement, we do not need to, we need not to write here return, and we need not to write here brackets. We are just returning a single line statement. So we can just condense in down to this in one line. Okay, so we are done here. So that's the bare minimum code we have written for our initialization of a Apollo server. So we have this schema, okay, and then we have this resolver. What we have in this schema? So we have a type called as query. So client will query something called as greet, and as a response to it, server will respond a string value. So here we have added a return type. Okay, so don't worry if you are not comfortable with this code. Okay, in next video we are going to understand this code in much more detailed way. Okay, let's start the server now. Okay, so I can start the server by typing npm, oh no, not npm, I can type node server, the name of file, or I could do is I can use nodemon. So if you do not have nodemon installed on your system, you can type npm install and nodemon and install it globally so that you can use in other projects as well. So once you have installed it, you can type nodemon and then the name of the file. Now the advantage of nodemon is that whenever we will make some change in our code part, our server will automatically restart. Okay, so let's start it. Okay, server is ready at this URL. So let's go to this URL by pressing Ctrl and clicking on it. Okay, it seems like it has opened. Okay, so this is the welcome page. We will click on this query or server. It will redirect us to a sandbox. Okay, it's basically a playground. It redirects us to a playground. Here we can basically test our GraphQL APIs. Okay, so this basically playground is similar to Postman. You can think of it as a Postman. We use Postman to test our REST APIs. Similarly, we use this playground to test our GraphQL APIs. Okay, so on the left side we have this box. Here we can type our queries, mutation or subscriptions, and on the right side here we can see we have panel called a response. Here we can see the response, what response we get from the server, from the GraphQL server. Okay, yep, and this is the documentation. Okay, don't worry too much about this interface. We will learn how to play with the different things that we have here. Okay, so on the documentation you can see that we have something called as query. Okay, if we click on it, then you can see that we can query something called as greet. Okay, and here also we can see that what response we will get a string as a response. Okay, let me type how to type a query. So we can use these brackets, and then I'll press Control space, and you can see that we can query something called as greet. Okay, that's it. Let's run it, and as a response, server is giving us a response, hello world. So that's your hello world program in GraphQL. So don't worry about the syntax and all. In the next video we are going to learn about the syntax in a great detail. So that's it for this video. Alright, so in our previous video we created a schema and resolver, and we passed it as a property to this object. Okay, so in this Apollo server object we have this type def property, and the value of that is the type def we have created above, not like this. So basically here key and value both are same. So we have just condensed it down to just type def, and same for resolvers. Okay, we have key or property called as resolvers, and the value of this property is the resolver that we have created above. So key value both are same, so we have just written resolvers. Okay, yep. So what I have done is I have created this user array, and inside this array we have two items. One is this and one is this. We have this objects, and in this object we have some, properties. So I have created this just to play little bit with GraphQL. Okay, we will have fun with GraphQL now. So think of this users as a user table. Let's assume that this user is a table in our database. Okay, let's assume that way. Okay, or think of it as a collection. If you are thinking of a NoSQL database, for example MongoDB, think of this user as a collection. Okay, or in case of relational database, think of it as a users table. So in that table we have two rows. Think of it that way. So what we will do now is, in our schema, let's say we will query something called as, let's say, users. So what client wants is that client will query something called as users, and as a response, what our GraphQL server will do is, as a response to its, GraphQL server will return this whole users array. Okay, yes. So how can we write it? Here we can write it this way. So we will respond for this query array of user, like that way. Now this user type is not available. We have to create it, right? So here we can create our type by typing type keyword, and then which type we want to create. We want to create user type. Okay, now what all properties it's going to have? Okay, let's say it's going to have, first of all, id. Okay, what will be the type of it? So we can type here string. Okay, or there is a better way, we can type id. Okay, though this implementation we have this type in GraphQL, so that means basically a unique value. Okay, it's a unique value basically. So one thing to notice here is I'm not adding commas. Whenever I'm creating a property, adding a property in schema, I'm not adding commas. So that's not needed, right? That's not the syntax. You do not have to add commas after your properties. Okay, so it's going to have, let's say, first name as well, and it's a string. Okay, so make sure that S is capital here. I'm giving a string with the S capital. Okay, similarly we will have a last name, and basically these types are, okay, I mistakenly added comma here. Okay, that's the habit, right? We have, whenever we create an object, we used to add a comma after every property. That's the habit. Okay, but we need not to add a comma here. Okay, so these types are GraphQL type. Okay, so make sure you are capitalizing the first character. Similarly, we will have, let's say, email, and again the type of it will be string. And yeah, password, we cannot write password. We should not write password actually, because what client will do with the password? Client in our database, we have to set that password. Okay, but in our schema we should not write it, right? Because on the client we don't require that password. Basically what we will do with the password, we should not do it. It's not recommended. You can technically add the password field here, but why to add it? Okay, yeah. So client will only be able to query these four fields only. Okay, client will never be able to get the password because we have not added in our schema. Okay, so these four fields only client can query. All right, so so we have completed our schema. So we will query something called as user, and as a response to it, server will respond with a array of users. Now we have to resolve this query, isn't it? Right, we haven't written a code to resolve this query. How to resolve it? Again, inside this query we will write something called as users, and as a response to it we will simply return our users array. That's it. We have this users array now. We will return it. Simple. Okay, let's save it, and now let's go to a playground and let's see what we have in the documentation. So we have query, and here you can see we have query. We can query something called as user. which will return an array of users, and this user has these properties. Okay, now you can type the query by yourself, or you can use this playground, and this playground will type the query for you. How you can do it? You can just click on this plus icon, you can click it and it will write the syntax for you, and here you can click on what all fields you want to query. Okay, what all fields you want from the server. So let's say we want ID, first name, last name, email, all the 4 fields. Here you can see we are not getting password as a suggestion because we have not added it in our schema. Okay, yep. So that's the syntax. So first of all, you can write query and you can give this query a name. So name is optional, technically you can remove this, or technically you can remove this query as well. These are optionals, but we should add it, right? That's the recommended syntax. So we should add a name to a query. For that we need to write query and then the name. So maybe we can write a meaningful name. Let's say get all users. Okay, you can write whatever name you want, so that other developer will look onto your query. They will get an idea that what this query does. That's why we are adding it a name. That's the recommended, that's the best practice we can follow here. Okay, let's run it. Okay, let's run this query, and as a response, boom, there you go. Here we can see that response that we have get. All right, beautiful. Okay, so that's the basic, right? And now let's learn a little bit more. Okay, let's play a little bit more. So now we have written a query to get all the users. Let's add one more thing. Let's say user can query, let's say individual user. Okay, let's say if client want that this only this user. Okay, let's say client want only this user, so client should be able to query individual user details also. How can we write the query for it? Let's say client will query an individual user. So for that we can write something called as user. We can create a property, or we can create a query user. But how can client query individual user? So let's say client will say that, hey, give me users which has id 1. So client has to give us detail, right? How we will know, how server will know that which user client wants? So client will give us, let's say client will give us this id, and client will say that, hey, give me the details of user which has this id 1. Okay, so what client will do is client will pass an id. So how can we pass it? We can add parentheses, and here we can create our own argument. Let's say id. Okay, and what will be the type of it? Type of it will be id. Okay, so client will pass an id. Okay, client will pass an id if that's the type of it, and what we will respond is we will respond a user. Okay, this time we are not adding array because we will not return the whole array. We will just return an individual user. Okay, now we have to resolve it. Let's copy this, and now here I can add this user. Okay, now to get this parameter, right, to get this argument in our resolver, how can we get it? Okay, so see, this function takes couple of arguments. Okay, so first argument basically is the parent, parent. So this parent is basically we do not have any parent in case of this query. This query is itself is on root level. Okay, so we do not have any parent for this it. Okay, so this will be undefined. Don't worry too much about this parent. In the upcoming videos I'll give you an example where you can consume this parent argument, but for now this will be undefined. We will get this parent as undefined because this query itself is on root level. Okay, yep. And second argument, basically here we can get all the args. Here we can get all the arguments. So right now we have this id, so this id we will get in the args. Okay, and third argument is something called as context. This context has some extra piece of information. Okay, I'll talk about this context also a little bit later. Okay, basically when you want to share some data between your resolvers, then at that time you can leverage this context. Okay, but for now what we want is we want this args for now. Okay, because this args contains this id that we will pass from the client. So what I can do is, let's say I can console.log args.id. Okay, yep, let's do that, and let's write a little bit of the code. Okay, so client has, we have got the id we have got the ID that which client has sent. Now let's what we want to do with that ID. Okay, so basically we just have to return first we will return a user which has this ID. Okay, so basically we can use find method. So in this array we have find method, we can use that and we will check, do we have ID, do we have, okay, first of all here we will have access to each individual item in this array, each individual item, and we will check that if any item has ID that is equal to the ID which we have got from the client, args.id. Instead of writing this way, what we could have done is, we could have directly destructured the ID from here. That's the more clean way of writing it, right? Okay, yeah, that's the clean way. You can still console, console.log the ID just to see it on the console. Okay, let's save this. Okay, so this is our console running it separately, and now let's write another query here. So if I'll go back, okay, now here you can see we have this user. Okay, when I click on this plus, okay, let me first of all get out of here. Okay, couple of things here I would like to highlight here. First of all, what we have done is we have created a query. Okay, we have created a schema and resolver for this query, but this argument is not a mandatory field. Okay, we want this ID, this argument, to be mandatory, because how we can respond if client has not passed this ID, right? So to make this argument a mandatory field, okay, client has to send this. So we can add here exclamation here, like so, because we cannot send a response, right? How we will know that which response clients want, which client response want? So this is not an optional field, this is a mandatory field. If client pass this ID, then only we will be able to respond, we will be able to send a valid response. Okay, let's make this ID a mandatory field by adding an exclamation. Okay, let's save this now. Now let's see what happens. Okay, I'll click on plus. I'll first of all click my cursor here, I'll put my cursor here and I'll click on plus. Once I do it, okay, let me open a new tab. Okay, yeah, here I will click on now again plus. So this is the syntax. Okay, now what it's happening here? Okay, let me first break down it to a small syntax. Okay, so first of all I'll write a query. Okay, I want to query the individual user. For that I'll write this, and I want user which has ID of 1. Okay, and what all things I want email, I want first name, let's say I want ID. Okay, this is the shorter syntax, that's the bare minimum syntax I have written. Okay, you can get rid of these variables for now, and I will run it, and boom, there you go, server is responding us with the user which has ID 1. Okay, if I pass ID 2, okay, run it, then server is responding us with the ID of 2. Let's say if we don't pass it, okay, well, let's don't pass it. If we don't pass it, okay, first of all it's throwing us an error. Okay, so here only we are getting an error, that's not allowed. But let's keep this as empty, then let's see what happens. Okay, then we are getting it null. Okay, server has not responded anything, but that's the mandatory field we have to pass. Okay, yep. Without that, yeah, so GraphQL server is throwing us an error if we don't pass an ID to it. Okay, perfect. So so that's the bare minimum syntax. Let's write it in a more better way. Okay, so right now whenever we were passing an argument, we were hard coding that value. That's not the recommended way. Okay, we should create a variable, we call it as query variable. Okay, once we create a variable, then we can pass our variable from this panel. We have this panel on the bottom. From here we can pass variables, or here we have this option of header. If you want to add some extra information to headers, we will use this headers little bit later, but this variable we can use it now. Okay, so how to create a query variable? Okay, you can type it manually, but let's leverage this playground, right? It will automatically write it for us. So let's click on this plus. Okay, I clicked it, and what all fields we want, let's select those as well. Let's say we want all these fields. So that's the syntax. That's the query. First of all, we have to write query. Let's give this query a name. Here, this playground has added a username, but you can write your own name. Let's say uh, get, yeah, you can write this way, guy, right? Get user by ID. Okay, this is more better name. Okay, and then to create a variable, we use dollar and the name of the variable name. You can give it any name you want, and then what will be the type of it. In order to use this variable, you can, again, you have to type dollar and the variable name. Okay, type a name, you can give it any. Okay, I can give it maybe a UID, and then I can use it inside here. I can type UID like so. I should be capital here. Okay, and from here, from this variables, I have to pass an object. Not this way, I have to pass an object, array object, and here I'll press control space to get the session. Here you can see we are getting session. So whenever you need session, you can type control space, it will give you session. So UID, and what will be the value of UID? Let's say I can give it 1. Okay, let's run it, and there you go. We are getting the details of the user which has this ID 1. Okay, if I pass it to and run it, we are getting again response. So now this is a general query. This is, we do not have anything hard coded in it, right? That's a general query. So that's about the query variable. So I think this is it for this video. In the next video, we will learn more about the GraphQL. Alright, so now that we have understood a little bit about the queries and resolvers and how they work, let's go ahead and understand about mutations. Okay. So before we jump into mutation, I want to make one thing clear, is that don't worry about parent and context argument that we have given here. Okay, in the upcoming videos, I'll show you an example where we can use them as well. Okay, as of now, don't worry about that. Alright, so what the heck is this mutation? See, whenever clients want to get the data, they will send a request for query. Okay, but let's say client want to update the data. Okay, let's say client wants to update the data or create the data or delete the data. In that case, client will send a request for mutation. So that's the difference between query and mutation. So think of this query as a GET request, as we have in the REST APIs. Okay, and think of this mutation as a update, create and delete request. Okay, so if client is sending a request for mutation, that means client has to create data, update data or delete data. Okay, yep. So query is to get the data and mutation is to change the data. That's the meaning in a nutshell. Okay, so first of all, we will have to create a mutation here. Okay, we will have to create a new type here. Type, and type will be this time mutation. mutation, mutation. Okay, so in mutation, so client can send mutation for what? Okay, that property we have to define. Let's say for now we can create a user. Okay, client will send a request to create a user, create new user. So I'll write a create user property here. Okay, so when client will send the request, okay, obviously client has to send us the data. Okay, data related to user that we have to save it in our database. Okay, so let's say client will send us, let's say, first name, which will be of type string, and it's mandatory to pass string, and it's mandatory to pass, and apart from that, client can send last name, which will be again of type string. Okay, and then client will send email also, and again which will be of type string, and client will send what else? Password. Yeah, we need password this time as well. Password. Okay, which will be again of type string. And as a response, what response we will give? So we will give a response of user. Okay, like this. Now if you can notice here, this is a problem. Okay, we are passing a four, we have to create a four query variables. Okay, let me save it and let's see if we can generate a mutation out of this schema. Okay, let me reload this. It should show, our documentation should show that we have a mutation this time. Oh, it's not showing it. Have I saved it? My server is not restarting. Okay, now it got restarted. Okay, let me see now again. Yeah, here you can see we have something called as now mutation. If we click on it, okay, let me create a new tab here. If I click on plus, yeah, so it has created only query variable for first name. Okay, because first name is mandatory. Okay, we have to make rest of the things also mandatory. Let's make it mandatory. Okay, let's make this also mandatory. Let's save this. Now again, let me remove it. Now again, I'll click on this plus. Now here you can see we have four query variables. Now this is this is not the recommended way. This is not how we should do the things. Okay, instead of creating a four variables or passing four fields as an argument, what we could have done is we could have passed only one field, maybe an object, and that object will have these fields. That's the better way to structure our application. Okay, so instead of doing this way, what we could do is we can create our own input type. Okay, see how to create it. Okay, we can type here input for that input, and then let's give it a name of, let's say, user input. Okay, and what I'll do, I'll basically cut all the things from here, Control X, and I'll put it here. But this time we do not need to add a comma here. Okay, so again we have written that these all things are mandatory. Client will definitely pass these all things. Now in here what we can do is, instead of passing individual variables or parameters, I should say, we will pass, let's say, client will send us a object. Let's give this object a name of, let's say, user new maybe. And what will be the type of that? This time the type of that will be user input that we have created above here, like so. And this object is mandatory to pass. For that, here also we can add this exclamation. That's it. Now this looks so clean. Okay, so that's the better way of structuring our schema. Okay, yep. So now we will send only one query variable, that is user new, and the type of that will be this. Okay, let's save this, and now let's get rid of this. Okay, let's get rid of this variables from the bottom also. Now if you will see that if I click on plus, see we are passing only one variable, and from here we can pass the whole object, whole user new object. That's what I wanted. Okay, so just by creating defining the mutation is in schema, it will not work. We have to resolve it. Okay, so if client sends the request for create user mutation, how we are going to resolve it? Okay, let's write the code for that. So in here, what we want to resolve this time, we have to resolve a mutation. So here I'll add a comma, and here I'll type mutation. We want to resolve a mutation this time. Okay, and again this will be an object. What mutation we want to resolve? We want to resolve this create user mutation. So I'll write that here, and first argument will be parent again here as usual, which will be undefined. So I'll keep this underscore because we are not going to use that parent. So let's give that variable argument underscore. Let's, yeah, and the second argument has second argument has the user new variable in it. So we can destructure from the argument, we can destructure user new. That's the parameter we are passing from the client. Okay, that we have defined in the schema. So we are destructuring, and okay, we have to write it this way. This is the arrow function, like so. So now what we want to do is, see, a couple of things we would like to have here. Okay, first of all, if you see that ID we have to generate. Okay, ID we have to generate. Client will not send the ID. Okay, so we have to generate it. For that, maybe a temporary solution would be we can import something from, we have an inbuilt module called as crypto, and crypto has something called as random, it should has UUID, random, I don't know why I'm not getting session when I'm typing random UUID. Let me write here crypto, and I can write maybe crypto dot, I should get session now. Okay, random UUID. I'm sure that crypto has this. Okay, let me do a console.log to see if we have this. So basically this random UUID generates a unique ID. Okay. So if we will see in our console now, we should be able to get it. Yeah, we are getting it. See. Okay. Yeps. So that we can use, and in our database now, what we could do is, here we have mentioned that ID will be of type ID. So this means basically a unique value. It could be a string or it could be an integer also, but let's make this a string. Okay, let's make this a string by writing it in a quotes. Okay, yes, anything random. Okay. And now we can generate a unique ID from this random UUID. Okay. So let's comment this for now. Okay, so here what we could do is, we could use this users array, and we could just push this user new object. But hold on, there is a problem if we do it this way. If we do it this way, then ID we are not saving it in our array. Okay, ID we are not saving it in our array. So first of all, what we could do, we have to do is, we have to create a copy of an object. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll pass an object and I'll use this spread operator to basically create a copy of object, and then we can add ID property to it, and the value of that will be crypto dot random UUID. Let me copy that, the name from here. Okay, yes, boom, and there we go. Now this should work. Okay, yep, that will do the work. Okay, and as a response, what response we want to give if this user is created successfully? So we are sending a response of type user, so maybe we can send a newly created user as a response. Okay, so what I will write here is, I can you know what, let me reuse this. Okay, so what I'll do is, I'll create here const new user, and I'll pass the object. I'll cut this object here and I'll paste it here, and then to this user push, we can pass this new user. Okay, and then simply we will return the new user, like so. That's the way. Okay. Okay, let's test this out now. Okay, so yeah, so let's pass a user new will be an object. Okay, you do not have to type it again manually. Okay, we can use we can click on this arguments, and here in the input fields we can click on this plus. Okay, let me get rid of this whole thing from here. Okay, if we click on plus, you see all the properties this playground has typed it for us. Okay, now we can just write the values. Let's say first name will be maybe Ahitesh. Okay, last name will be, let's say, Kumar. Again, inside quotes we will have to write. Email will be, I hope this is visible. Okay, let me pull this up, and email will be hi@hi.com, and password will be 12345. Okay, and once that is saved. Once the user is saved, we are responding with that newly created user. So what all things we want from that newly created user? Let's say we want ID, okay, we want email, we want first name, and we want last name. Okay, let's run it, and whoa, we got null. Why? Let me see that again, the code part. We are responding it with a user. We have this user new. We have pushed it. We are returning the new user. Let me see if it has added. Okay, I can, you know, uh, get all the users. Let me run it. No, this has not been added into our array. Why is that a case? Maybe server has not restarted or sort. Yeah, that's the problem. Okay, sometime nodemon sucks. Okay, so let's run it again, and boom, there you go. This ID has been generated by crypto, right? And here you can see, if you will now run a query to get all the users, now you will see that newly created user has been added into this array. That's awesome. So that's it for this video. In the next video we will learn more advanced stuff. Alright, so now let's finally understand about when can we consume this parent and context argument. Okay, so first of all, uh, these are our resolvers, right? These functions are our resolvers, right? So we have access to three things in resolver. First is the parent. Okay, in our case, whatever resolvers we have written so far, it's undefined. Second is the argument. That's these things that we pass, okay, from the client. And third is the context. Okay, so for now I can remove this context, and here I can write underscores since we are not using it. Okay. Let's understand this. Now in order to consume this parent, first we will understand about the parent argument. Okay, so what I have done is I have created an array of to-dos. Okay, I have created this array to-dos, and each individual item has two things. It has title and buy, and buy has the value of the ID of the user. Let's say it has this ID which matches the ID of our user. Okay, so this to do is created by Mukesh because here buy, the value of buy and ID matches here. This to do is also been created by Mukesh, and this to do is created by this Suresh because here ID is same. Okay, this ID and this ID is same. All right, so now what will happen is, let's say when we will client will query for individual users. So as a response we are sending the user, right? As a response we are sending these details to client. Apart from that we will send to dos as well. So what all to dos this user has created, and this will be an array because one user can create multiple to dos. This will be an array, and it will be array of to do. So to do type we have not created it, so let's create this type. Okay, type, and then it will be to do like this. Okay, and to do will have title, title title, which will be of type string, and it will have a by, which will be of type id. Now what we could have done is we could have make this four fields mandatory. Okay, by adding an exclamation. By adding an exclamation here, what we are saying is that what we are saying to GraphQL server is that these four fields, whenever client will query for these four fields are never going to be null. Okay, yes, this is what we are telling by adding exclamation. These fields can never be null. That means that means that these four fields will have some value in the database, but this to do can be null also. Okay, it's not a mandatory field. To do can be null also, but since we have not added exclamation here. Okay, and if we have the to do, then each to do will have this title and by property. That's the mandatory field, so we can add here exclamation. Yeah, here we will not add exclamation. Yep, so that's done. Okay, let's see what happens now. If I now run this query, okay, to get the individual details of the individual user. Okay, that is get user by ID. I can run this query. So here I can pass the ID. Oh, I already have that ID typed. Okay, this ID is of Suresh, right? This ID is of Suresh. If I am not wrong, yes. I'll copy this and I'll paste it here. Okay, and here I'll ask for to-dos also. And from to-dos, I want title and I want by. Okay, let me minimize it a little bit. Now let's run this query. Now you will see that in to-dos we are getting null, but it should not be null, right? Because Suresh has created one to do, right? So how GraphQL will know that Suresh has created to do? We haven't written any code which tells GraphQL that Suresh has created this to do. Okay, see, what does this mean now? This means that we haven't resolved this query properly. Okay, we have to resolve it properly. Okay, so we have to resolve this user. Okay, and this user has to do, so we have to resolve this user properly. So here now I will type here, we have to resolve this user. Okay, and again an object, which field we want to resolve. So we want to resolve this to do field. Okay, and it will have access to again parent and argument we are not passing, so it will be undefined. So let's write only first argument, that is parent. Now here if we console.log the parent, let's say parent, now this user is on the root level. Okay, user is on the root level, and then after that this to do's comes. Okay, so parent of it, in this parent we will have the user details. Okay, so parent of this to do's is the user, right? So in this parent we will have the user details. So let me console.log it. Yes, let's save it. And now let me run this again. If I run it again, okay, now if I open my console here, now here you can see we have the details of the user. Okay, now we can consume this parent. We can write some logic here. So what we can write is, in order to resolve this to do's, what we could do is think of let me think. We can write, yeah, so we can use filter because we want to return multiple to do's. Yeah, so what we can do is we can write here to do's. Oh, capital to do's array. To do is the name of our array. Okay, and then I can use this filter method and I can filter out the to do which has this by in to do. Okay, first of all I will get this individual to do's and I will check if this to do that we have in our user array, the by property is equal to the parent, and parent also has the ID. Okay, if it is equal, then filter it out and return it. Okay, let's return that array. That's it. That logic we can write. Now we have written a logic. Okay, now we have written a logic. Now our GraphQL server will know that who has created these to do's. Okay, that's the simple logic. Okay, we can get rid of this. Let's try this one more time. Okay, let's save this. And now if I run it, okay, let me see if my server is running. Okay, it sucks. Okay, sometime nodemon sucks. Okay, let me run it again. Here now you can see this to do's array and this Suresh has created one to do. Okay, let me try different person. Okay, let me try copy this ID and let me here add that in our variables. Control V. Oh, actually Control C, Control V, and let's run it. And there you go. This Mukesh has created two to do's. So that's how we can use parent. Okay, so basically, when we have relational data, then it's used. Basically, when we have relational data, then it's this parent is used. Argument is used. Okay, so in next video, I will explain you about how can we use context. Alright, so now that we have understood the basics of GraphQL, let's cover few more things before ending this section. So, we have learned that a resolver basically takes three arguments. One is the parent, second is the arguments that we are passing from client, and third is the context. So let's say your application will grow. Okay, then what you will do is you will create a different file. Let's say the resolvers which are resolving this query, you will put them in a separate file. You will put this mutation, let's say resolver related to mutation, in a separate file. Now let's say now you want to share data between your resolvers. How you will do that? There comes the context. Okay, so we have passed these two properties to Apollo server. We can pass one more, that is context. Okay, yes. So I can write here one more property, and that is context. Okay, context. Now this context has some extra piece of information, right? So the we can in this context we can create an object, or we can have access to, we can pass a function also. That function will return an object. Now this in function we have access to some extra piece of information. For now, let's don't worry about that. We will be learning about that in authentication section, so not don't worry too much about that. For now we can create an object. Okay, let's say we want to share some data between resolvers. Okay, so in this object, let's say what we want to share. Let's say we will share, let's say maybe user logged in, and the value of that will be true. So this is the thing that we want to share. So we created an object in our context. So our context has this object, and this object has a property user logged in, and that's the true. So now I want to share this object with my uh, resolvers. How can I do that? Simply I can access this object. I can access this object as a third argument to my resolvers. Okay, let's say mm, let's say we can access it here. Okay, when we are resolving the individual users. Okay, so let's say here I can type ctx, and I can, instead of console.log id, we can see I can ctx, I can log the ctx. Okay, let's save this. And now if you will see, when I will query an individual user, okay, let me run it. Okay, now in the console you can see we have this user logged in true in the context, right? So what you can do is, maybe let's say from this context you can destructure this user logged in, and now what you can do is, let's say this if this user logged in is not present, in that case you can throw an error. You can use this context, and you can write logic based on that. Okay, let's say if this user logged in, okay, if this user logged in property is not available, I can add here not. In that case, what I can do is I can throw an error. So for to throw an error, I can type new throw new error, and let's say you are not logged in. Okay, let's save this, and now if I try to run it, I should not get that error. Okay, let me see if the server has restarted. No, it has not. So if I run it, I will not get any error. But let's say if I make this false, okay, if I make it false, then I should get that error. Okay, if I run it, now you can see we are getting that error, you are not logged in. Okay, so that's the way how you can use context as a third argument to your resolver. If you want to share some data between your resolvers, then you can use this context. You can put it in a context, and you can use in your resolvers. Okay, yes. So let's remove this for now, or we can leave it here. Let's make this true, so that we should not get any error. Now since we have some time left with us, okay, let me explain you a little bit more things. Let's say I'll get rid of this to do form here. Let's say I'll run it. Okay, let's say that we are getting user from an id, let's write one more query to again get the user. Okay. Yeah. Let's give this UID 1. Let me give this UID 1 name to this variable, and to this I will give UID 2. UID 2 array UID 2, and let me copy this and here, and here I can type control space. Okay, control space UID 1. Here I can pass UID 1, and here I'll pass UID 2. Okay, so what I will do with this UID, again I will pass a value to this UID variable, and I want ID of that user, I want first name of that user, I want last name of the user, and I want email of the user. Okay, there is one more topic left, that is alias. Okay, I'll explain you what the alias is. Okay, let me explain that first. See, leave this example for now. Let's go to our create user example. Okay, this is the perfect example for aliases. If I run it, okay, let's first see if I get all the users. Right now we have this two user. Okay, when I'll create a new user, okay, when I'll create a new user, server responds us with server has this data. Okay, inside that data we have this create user. Okay, so let's say we want to change this property name. Okay, so whatever our uh, mutation name, whatever mutation name that we have given, that's the name that is decided over here in the response, right? So since we have given our mutation name of create user, so that's why in the response inside this data we have this create user mutation. But let's say we want to change this response. I want that in data this is the details of the user, right? But I should not see here user. Maybe I should see here user, something called as user, something called as meaningful basically. So inside this data, instead of having create user, we should have a key with user, and then user will be an object. That makes sense, right? So we can basically give an alternative name to this create user. All right, so how can we do that? Let's say here I can write user and I can add colon. So that's the way how can I give a alias name to this mutation. Same I can do this with query as well. Okay, if I create user, now as a response, see if in this data we have this user, so the name we changed, the query name we changed. All right, so respond now as a response also, this we are getting this user instead of create user, we are getting this user property here. That's awesome, right? So in this case we have two users with the same name. So here we can give these two users, that's why we are getting here error. Okay, it's basically conflicting. So let's say here I can write u1, I can give this this query a name u1, and to this query I can give name u2. Okay, yep, and let me pass a value of uid2. Let me get it from here. Let me first check. Okay, that's already we have. Let me copy this id, control c and control v. Okay, perfect. Okay, now if I run it, I will get these two details. Okay, I will get the details of these two users, that id which I have passed. Okay, perfect. But now here you can see we have this repetitive code. If you can notice, we have this repetitive code, id, first name, last name, we have repeated it, right? So what we could do is we could have reduced this line of code. So how can we reduce it? For that we can create a fragment here. Okay, if we have some repetitive fields, we can create a fragment and put those fields in a fragment, and we can use the fragment here. Okay, let me show you the syntax of it. Here we can create a fragment. Okay, fragment we can give name, let's say user fields fields and on, and here we will write user. Okay, yes, on this user. So whatever fields we want to make common, we want to pull all these fields from the user. That's why we are writing here user. Okay, this name you can give whatever you want, but this name has to be from wherever you are getting these all details. That name you should write here. For example, these all fields belongs to that user, this user type, right? These all fields belong to this user type. That's why here we have written user. Okay, now what all fields we want from that user? We want, let's say, id from the user. I want first name from it, I want last name from it, and I want email from it. Okay, so now that we have created our fragment and we have given our fragment this user field name, I can copy this, and instead of writing it twice here, I can just spread it, control V. I can write it in a this way, and same thing I can copy it and I can put it here. So now our code is little bit cleaner. It's not repetitive actually. So whatever was repetitive code, we extracted that and we created a fragment out of it, and now we are using that fragment, or we are spreading it to use it. Okay, basically we are spreading it. So that's the syntax of how you can create a fragment and use it. So if you have some repetitive code or same fields, then you can create a fragment out of it. If I run it, still I should get the response. Okay, but I don't use this fragment quite often because it makes a query little bit complex to understand. So that's why I keep things simple and I don't use fragments, but you should know that topic also. That's why I covered it. Okay, so that's it for this section. From the next section we will start working on our project.